everyone for joining us today as we celebrate Women Empowerment Week. I'm Arsha Narkar, the president of LSE Women in Business Society, and I will be moderating today's International Women's Day panel, featuring three inspirational women who have made incredible strides in their respective industries of banking, consulting, and law. Our first panelist is Ms. Anshula Kant. Ms. Kant is the Managing Director and World Bank Group Chief Financial Officer. She has more than 35 years of experience in banking through her work at the State Bank of India, where she managed assets of 500 billion US dollars and greatly improved the capital base. She is now responsible for the financial and risk management of the World Bank Group. Our next panelist is Ms. Lorna Strong. Ms. Strong is the Deputy General Counsel for HSBC Global Trade and Receivables Finance. She provides global oversight, coordination, and training for legal counsel in over 40 jurisdictions. Ms. Strong and her global legal team have been instrumental in advising innovative solutions for trade finance, including the financial trade blockchain transactions. Our third panelist is Ms. Wong Mei. Ms. Wong is the founder, CEO, and chief change catalyst of APAC Global Advisory, an award-winning boutique end-to-end change management consultancy. Ms. Wong brings with her more than 2 decades of industry experience leading brand custodianship and talent management for organizations like Unilever, Citibank, and Heineken. She's currently also a global INSEAD leadership mentor for the INSEAD Business School. Thank you, panelists, for joining us today. We look forward to hearing your insights. Let me begin by asking you, what is one piece of advice you would like to give your younger selves? Ms. Wong?
Well, if I had to give a piece of advice to myself, especially in my 20s, I would say it would be to be able to say no more often. And the reason I say that is because it was during that period of time where it was extremely challenging to find that balance, the kind of tension of career and having had a child quite young as well, making sure that we have that balance. When I look back now and I look at the roles, essentially because of my nature of wanting to help others, and also the belief that if I didn't grasp opportunities at that time, it might go away. I tended to take on a lot more, I would say, than probably I could have managed at that point of time, to be honest about it. So if you look at it, it's roles like not just your direct leadership roles, but also indirect projects, matrix reporting line, non-profit. I was vice president of the Institute of Advertising for 10 years. And then, of course, we mustn't forget what we're doing in charity, for example. As a mother, as a sister, as a daughter, these are all roles, you see. So looking back, I think I could have perhaps paced myself a bit more. There's actually quite a bit of time. The 20s, you still have, and you can continue your career for many more years to come.
I think that's a great advice. I think many young people now tend to feel like they have to achieve everything when they're 20. And I think it's sometimes step back and say no to some opportunities and focus on some. Ms. Strong?
I guess if I told anything to my younger self, it would be that life and career won't happen as a straight progression where you're continually going up. You will have some successes, but you'll have huge disappointments and huge failures. And looking back on it, it's kind of surprising what you got through. But I think I'd tell myself that the failures aren't necessarily failures, because sometimes it's not getting what you want that leads to a better outcome. For myself, for an example, when I was first a young lawyer, I liked private practice, but I was frustrated with the firm I was in. And I really wanted to go a certain direction, but I couldn't get a job in that. I took a job with the bank, which is not something I wanted at all. I thought that would be the end of my career as a lawyer. And in fact, it's been sort of the most brilliant career I could have imagined. So not getting what I want was great. So not a straight progression, setbacks lots of times. And failures aren't necessarily the failures that they seem at the time. That's what I'd say.
I think that's so true, especially now that we're facing this pandemic. So many things are uncertain. And I think we're all having to learn to deal with uncertainty and letting life take its course. Ms. Kant?
So, Arsha, thanks, and it's really good to be here. I can't see the people who have joined, but a big hello to them as well. So, I have a little bit of a different take on this, given my personal experience nearby. When I started my career back in the 1980s, actually, I did not face any overt discrimination as a woman. But what I did face was more insidious. People would tend to offer me assignments and less challenging roles, thinking that as a young woman, I needed to be sheltered from the rough and tumble of the workplace. And with hindsight, I feel that if I had allowed this attitude to prevail and accepted the easier choices, over time, you start getting perceived as someone who can't pull their weight in an organization, particularly in an organization which is really hierarchical. And even worse, it could also lead to an undermining of your self-worth or your own assessment of your worth. So I struggled a bit with this in the early years. The attitude from my male colleagues was fairly protective. So it wasn't from a bad place, but they thought, young girl, Eastern UP, which is really a backward part of India, how will she manage? So I think if someone at that time had given me some good advice, that don't be a passive taker about the choices being made for you. Raise your voice. If it suits you, if personally you're up to it, go for the tougher choices. It pays off, at least career-wise, in the long run. Of course, you have to do your balancing act, as Mewai mentioned. So yes, and I think I got there within 5 or 6 years of starting work. Speak up and demand the more challenging roles, more interesting roles. Yeah.
And Shula, I would jump in and say I fully agree with you, especially because women sometimes tend to self-select out. If they don't have all the skills for the job, they'll think, I can't do that. And rather than just taking the chance and putting themselves forward. So yeah, be bold in your choices.
Speaking of bold choices, how would you say you determined which career path that you wanted to take, especially in your early 20s? Ms. Kant, would you like to?
So, Arsha, you asked which career path? So, I had actually studied economics for about 5 years after school. And, I don't know, maybe I sort of limited myself, but in my mind at that time, the choices available to me, I follow the academic route, or I could take and opt for a career which was a little more, adventurous, a little more exciting. So, back in those days in 1980s, State Bank India was the largest bank in the country. It still is, of course. It was also a public sector bank and a key partner in the growth of the Indian story. It offered opportunities to work in diverse fields of banking and different geographies. I thought it would be, exciting, and I thought I'd go for it. And, with hindsight, when I look back, in my more than 35 years of working there, I don't ever recall being bored or not interested or fascinated by what I was doing. I mean, if you think of it, there was less specialization and more of a generalist kind of an approach. So, I worked in rural areas in agri lending and financial inclusion. I worked in urban areas, SME business, large industrial credit, international trade. And then I was in Singapore for a few years, heading the SBI operations there. So, and the other big thing there was, since it was a very large organization, what you did there moved the needle, meaning it made a difference to your community, to your society, in some ways to your economy and your country. So yeah, I guess that's why I chose it. And that's why I worked there for so many long years, 35 years to be precise.
Ms. Strong, do you want to go next? I know yours is a very different path from
Well,
that.
I do have an unusual career progression in that my first profession was as a nurse. And I'm not sure. I sometimes wonder if I didn't have that much imagination when I was young, but I very much thought of the traditional female roles, nurse, teacher, some sort of caregiver, or the professions, medical or law. And I started out in nursing, I think, because I had the idea of traveling the world. And I developed quite a good career in that. I was a community health nurse on a very small island at one point, and the sole healthcare provider. But I always dreamed of law. And for me, the big change was I had already had children. I'd had them in my 20s and was making the decision to go back to graduate school and taking a degree in law. And that sounds sort of like an easy choice, but at the time it was difficult. It was frowned upon socially because I already had children. Why would I want to pursue anything for myself? You know, how did it help them? And also, even I was turned away in the admissions office. In those days, nothing was online. I went in and got my application forms, and when they found out I had children, they said, "Don't bother, you'll never be able to do it." And I faced that again. So I had to have a lot of sort of strength and belief in myself. At the same time, my nursing career was good. So I used to always think, well, if this doesn't work out, I can go back and do that. So that was the defining moment for me, was continue on despite having the children and despite a lot of adversity to that decision.
Ms. Wong?
What I'm going to say is going to be quite different from Anshula and Lorna, because I studied economics, and halfway through studying in Bristol, I realized that I didn't want to spend the rest of my life in a bank. It's a complete different story. And I started to search for what I wanted to do and what I love to do, which I knew was something to do with marketing. And when you ask me this question, 3 words come to mind. Firstly, curiosity, adventure, and grasp opportunity. I realized I was so curious. I actually, I would say, did the crazy thing of trying to understand what kind of industry or types of marketing I wanted to get into. And I wrote to the different kinds of companies and I landed in brand management with Unilever. So all through my career was very much always like trying to find out what were the aspects that I had passion for. And then the adventure was very much around the fact that even till today, I'm always looking out for something that allows me to continue to learn, and even if it can be risky. I mean, I took on the postings into Vietnam to run the North and the South integration. And within 2 weeks or so, I moved to Hong Kong at one point. It's linked to grasping opportunities, but also that sense of adventure and wanting to venture to see the rest of the world. I think. I think that's essentially my career story. Yeah.
Speaking more about that, do you say you had a specific choice or opportunity that you took on that you would think was career defining?
Are you talking? You're asking me, Asha? Okay. Yes, I would say so. I think the career defining choice. I was going to talk a little bit about Vietnam, but I think at this point, probably in view that I'm supposed to talk more about around entrepreneurship, I think it's all about, for me, having that courage to hang up my corporate cloak and to walk the path of the entrepreneur. And why was that a career defining choice, or why did it need courage? It's because when you spend more than 2 decades in the corporate world, and the path is in some case quite defined, because it's while Lorna says it's not linear, it's kind of, the organization is set. You don't need to worry about all that aspects. sort of, I go to work, I felt I was building the dream of the organization or somebody else, right? Stepping out meant that it was a totally new playing field, and I had to define and pursue my own dreams. So that for me was a career defining move. And how I managed to overcome that was actually somebody said to me one day, um, if your life had to end now, what what regrets do you have? And and I really reflected on that, and I said, wow, it's the fact that I've not ventured out and succeeded or failed. And then I realized I didn't really care if I failed, but I cared if I had not tried. So that's the reason I feel that that's a career defining move. And today, obviously, as you shared, although we are still very much a baby, we've managed to be noticed as in APAC as one of the change organizations that make an impact. And it's a small thing, but last week I managed to finally not have to rent and buy my own office. So it's just these small things that matter now for me, and it's a different path altogether. Yeah.
Wow, congratulations on that. That's indeed amazing. Ms.
Thank
Khan,
you.
would you say for you, after 35 years of working at SBI, leaving SBI, was it a tough decision?
Not really, Arshia. And let me just take a moment to congratulate Mewai. It's not a small thing. And Lorna, I'm really amazed to move from a nursing career into a legal career. I know how challenging legal studies are. You know, my daughter is a lawyer. It's not easy. You guys have done amazingly great. These are brave choices and difficult things to do. So, not really, Arshia. Actually, I like I said, there is a very there is a big difference. Of course, State Bank of India is all about development, growth, equitable growth in a very large country like India, where there are a lot of poor people. We did a lot of things like financial inclusion, reaching out to people in agri areas, digital financing, digital banking, etc. Having done that for 35 years, actually, I'd already started thinking, what will I do next? I don't want to hang up my boots when I'm not yet 60 or something. There's still a lot to do. And when this opportunity came up, I thought it was just a very nice segue from the Indian scene into a global scene. And it's been almost about 1.5 years since I've come on to the World Bank. Let me say this, Archie, I've learned so much. And that's what made it so exciting. Every day I learned something new. I didn't know a lot of things that existed out there in the world of official development assistance. And the other interesting thing is that India is one of the key client countries for the World Bank. So a lot of things I learned and did in State Bank of India are proving very useful here. So I think it was a nice natural progression. So it combines the finance and risk aspects of the job. Plus, there is this huge development agenda, which of course the World Bank group follows clearly. To eradicate poverty, extreme poverty, reduce inequality, and gender parity and gender empowerment is a big, big piece of our key focus areas. Yeah.
That's good to know. Ms. Strong, would you say for you, since you moved from healthcare law to obviously now working at HSBC, would you say that was a career-defining choice, or was it something else?
Well, I guess career-defining choices, I say it's a bit of a mix of interest, opportunity, and luck. So getting into law was definitely an interest. When I did my articles or training, I was at a law firm that did medical and insurance law, which seemed to be a good fit since I had the background. But by luck, I ended up helping on an international arbitration, a commercial arbitration dealing with Japan, which completely sparked my interest. And I decided I'd had no experience in business. And I thought, wow, I really like this stuff. So suddenly I wanted to pursue that, and I moved to a business law firm. And then I was there for a while. And as I said, how I ended up at the bank was completely luck. It was something I didn't know about, and it sparked my interest. And sort of like Anshula, I've never had a boring day, which so I continue to have interests, and that helps, but also opportunity and luck. And I think staying open to that. So having a vision for yourself, saying, where do I want to go with my next step, but not closing down doors, so that when you meet someone who tells you something interesting, that's sort of interesting. Maybe you go to a seminar and you think about, wow, this is an interesting area I've never explored. So being open and being curious about other opportunities, not just saying, this is my vision, I'm going to do that, and that's the end of it, because your career will change based on what happens during the years. So interest, opportunity, and luck, all are in there.
I think that's great. Interest, opportunity, and luck. You were speaking about vision. Would you say that your vision and priorities have changed from when you first started?
Oh, definitely. I mean, circumstances change too, right? At one point, you might be single, in one point in a relationship, in one point, economics might be the most important for you. You simply need something that's secured and pays well. At another time, it's exploration or curiosity or taking a chance, and I do think it's easier to take a chance when you're young, but you shouldn't shut that down as you get older too and have more responsibilities as well, right? So it changes all the time. Yeah.
That's great. Ms. Wong?
Yes, I would say my vision has changed quite a bit. In the earlier days, when I first started out, it was about just doing what I loved in marketing, and in some way being able to be empowered in leadership. That was it. And I was very career minded, which became quite challenging for me to balance, especially having the family and the little girl come on board. And but today, I think it's all about a much more holistic vision and my purpose of building legacy through change, which I made that into my company vision. It's all linked to how people getting family businesses to ensure they have their succession planning in place to take them into the next level through change. And that links very nicely and integrates very nicely with my passion for the young generation as well, and being able to mentor and even be guardians to some of the young generation. So I would say that my vision has changed quite a bit.
You spoke of the young generation. Starting with you, Ms. Kant, what would you say is the greatest way that young people can add value to our society?
So, just to go back a little to your previous question, I'm actually having fun with this panel, because what I hear from Lorna, what I hear from Mewai, sometimes it resonates in so many ways, sometimes it's so different. So we, just four of us, we are so different, and yet in some ways thinking is very similar. So to your question, I think more than ever before, it's really important that young people put their most valuable traits to work. In this pandemic, the challenges are huge. And what are these qualities? Arsha, you would know that you're a young person, and it's a spirit of adventure, it's creativity, it's ability to innovate, change, and adapt. I think in this crisis hit world, business models are changing across industries. Innovative use of technology to deliver digital solutions. Now you think of it: telemedicine, tele-education, financial inclusion, digital payments, or even better tech-based agri practices. Urban development, transport, you name it. You need innovation, you need technology, you need quick thinking and adaptation and be able to change. So I think these solutions need to be innovative, but also affordable, inclusive, and environmentally sustainable. That's really critical and key today. So who can do this better than young people? So I would not say identify a particular industry or particular line of work. I think this spirit of innovation and change should be brought to wherever you are, whichever field you are working in. And already at the World Bank, we are seeing remarkable creativity and innovation, youth-led initiatives in sectors like health, jobs, food security. And these efforts, like I said, are really needed today as we recover towards a more sustainable and resilient recovery post the pandemic.
Absolutely. I think those are some great points. Ms. Strong, I think you are very much involved in trade finance, but in bringing innovative solutions to trade finance. So what would you say are the changes that are taking the industry by storm, and how can young people contribute to this?
Well, certainly the digitalization, or moving things to digital, moving things to online, we're all here, are huge. And young people have huge successes in that area, experience much more than some of us older types. But I think probably there's two most important things, I think, the way young people can add to our society. And one is to question and challenge the status quo. So really, you're in a great position. You have new ideas, fresh ideas. You've not been sort of pulled one way or the other for many years. So question what the other people in society say when you can or can't do something. And the other thing is, take chances and don't be worried about personal failure. And this is going back to what I said before. There's so many opportunities. And when you're young, it's hard to even imagine the business and employment opportunities that are available. It's a lot easier to fail when you're young, I'd say, because often you don't have dependents, you don't have maybe a lot of property that you're worried about losing. That said, young people are often the most worried about failure because they haven't experienced it a lot. So they think it's a big thing. And then they also have parental or family pressure. You have to get that perfect job. You have to be, even if it's a sort of lower end position, on the right path to success. So there's a lot of fear of failure. As you get along in your career, like I said before, you realize failure is part of it. And so you're less fearful of it, but sometimes your failure impacts more people. So I would say be bold and take chances when you're young, and just try things. When something doesn't work out, you change your focus.
Absolutely. Ms.
And Arshia, I just want to add to what Lorna said. I think the other thing is that you really need to be interested and enjoy what you do. I find that if you don't have a passion or interest in what you do, I think success or failure, it sort of falls by the wayside. Life becomes dreary and dull. So I think it's important to enjoy and look forward to going to work every day, actually, or getting to work every day.
100%. And that changes even in any job. At first, it might
Yes.
be interesting. And after a few years, you might say, why am I here? I don't
Yes.
find interest in it. Then you should start asking yourself, I think this is time for a change, right? So.
I think, speaking more about passion and just keeping on going, what would you say that motivates you to keep going? Because I think all of you have such demanding careers and have been doing so for so long. Ms. Wong?
Yeah, you know what Anshula was saying, that we have different things that we're talking about, and yet there are similarities. Actually, both Lorna and Anshula has said it for me. When I wake up each morning, it's all about the love for my work. And it's always been like this. And I've always felt if I don't wake up like this, I might as well just change what I'm doing, because that's such a core part of your life, right? The other thing I think Anshula also mentioned, which is very important for me, is my belief in this whole lifelong learning approach. And I feel the same. Even today, being here, I reflected back on just what I did at work. And I learned something. Every day, I have to learn something. Otherwise, I feel like I'm stuck. I feel like for some reason, I don't feel happy. So I hope I will continue learning for the next 40 years, I hope. And and enjoy and love what I do, because that keeps me going.
Ms. Kant, Ms. Strong, do any of you have anything to add? about your demanding careers?
Well, I guess I would say the curiosity, love of problem solving, and that's the more demanding, the more problems to solve.
Mhm.
And I always say I have a bit of a short attention span, and I work better to a deadline. So sometimes it's nice to work under a pressured environment for that reason. Another thing is also the people that you come into contact with. I think that's a huge motivator. At least for me. And so having a sort of high pressure dynamic career, you tend to come into in touch with more people, which is interesting. Even like today, meeting all of you.
That's great. Speaking of the different types of people you can meet, have there been any sort of challenges or barriers that you faced? All of you are in male-dominated industries. Are there people who've said you can't make it or you don't deserve to be here? Or anything of that sort. Miss Wong?
Well, I'm not sure if you are aware, all of you are aware that I was working in a very male-dominated environment for more than a decade, almost 2 decades, which is in the beer business in Asia Pacific breweries and Heineken. I think reflecting on this question today on International Women's Day, to be really honest, okay, I actually feel that the situations where I have faced this kind of comments or behaviors had to do with the fact that it was uncharted territory for many to see me taking on some of the positions. For example, I'm not sure if you're familiar with a brand called Tiger Beer. I was the first woman global champion running the brand. There was no women in the global commerce in the brewery. So on the first day of work, people were looking at me through the glass window and wondering who this person was. And I was told, I've been here for 20 years. Who are you to tell me? Have you been in this industry, etc.? And obviously, taking on my assignment in Vietnam, I've also been told by my welcoming words from some include things like you should be doing some support function. You shouldn't be running, marketing or sales related. It's not for women or not for a Singaporean woman to come here. So that kind of comment. But I actually look at it and it's very much because of the fact that it was not familiar territory for them. And then there's this lack of awareness at that time of how to deal with this awkwardness, possibly. Having said that, I would want to say some good things here at this point for the male as well, because I'm where I am because of at least 5 to 10 men who have believed in me in the corporate. I've been very lucky to have had bosses who were very forward looking, even during SARS with my little girl. At that point in time, it was not a norm to be running calls from home. He said, you don't need to come in. And when I run the sponsorship events for football, for the beer, I had to bring my daughter at some point in time because of childcare situation, and I was allowed to do that. And to make sure everything was set up before moving on. And then many other men follow suit to teach me things like to give me visibility to the board, to teach me to speak up or get me to speak up more as well. Because as you can hear, I have a very soft voice. So these were some of the stories I had.
Ms. Kant, do you have any other, do you have any similar anecdotes to share?
So, Arsha, I don't know if you're aware that the bank, State Bank of India, I worked for, it had branches and offices across India and even overseas. So there was a policy for staff to change assignments every 2 to 3 years. And quite often, more often than not, it involved a change in location. So in the early years of my career, for about 15 years or so, I was able to stay within the same district, and that allowed us to stay together as a family. And at that point, when I'd reached middle management stage, now I think my HR team was insistent that I need to move out to a bigger city, opt for bigger and more challenging, more varied assignments if I really needed to move up the corporate ladder. And I remember my boss at that time, he was actually also a friend. He used to visit us at home sometimes. He counseled me, he says, you have such a wonderful home, a great husband, two lovely children. I mean, why would you want to upset the apple cart? Just stay where you are, work at that middle management level, and you'll be able to stay around the same location. And in fact, if you take up the challenge of moving out, I'm pretty sure that you'll put in your papers or resign within 1 year because it will be so difficult for you. But, he was a well wisher. He didn't come from a bad place again. But I didn't listen to him. And I moved, and I think in many ways he was correct. It wasn't an easy choice to make. It was very hard on me, my husband, my children, and everyone. But these are choices each individual makes according to their own personality or thinking or family circumstances. But had I not moved, I would have not been able to have the career path that I had subsequently. But the other big thing I think, Arsha, is of course it's a very, I think, commonly accepted, but yet it is very critical even today, and that is availability of good childcare facilities, which are readily available. Even today, I was just talking to my kids yesterday. There are real choices to make. They worry and they agonize about it. If we start a family, who will look after the kids? You are working, you can't help us out so much. You're full-time busy. So there are still concerns in a lot of countries, in a lot of cities. Do you have reliable and adequate childcare? Unless you have that, more often than not, it's the woman in the household who sort of takes a little bit of a step back in her career to take care of the family.
Absolutely, that's so true. I think more often than not, the burden of childcare always falls on the women. But I think despite that, all of you have managed to make it so far. Ms. Strong, do you have any personal anecdotes to share about this?
I would like to share some anecdotes. I can't see the participants, but I'm hoping, aside from women colleagues, that there's also some men ally in the audience. And I think when you're talking from a diversity point of view, one of our challenges is to create empathy in others that are different from us. And sometimes the way you can do that is to share stories, about what happened to you when you first started the job. So I'll share a few. One of the first barriers that I actually encountered was my work experience. When I was looking for work as a lawyer, my work experience had been as a nurse in a very traditional female role. And that was very frowned upon. In fact, it was even laughed at in some interviews. And I will say, having been both a lawyer and a nurse, that if you're a good nurse, you can probably do any job in the world or most. So it's a demanding profession. But because it was a traditional female profession, it was not seen as valuable. And that was a challenge. And I have actually met other women who are in finance or in law whose background was, say, as an air hostess or a waitress or a teacher. And often we've agreed that we've had to suppress that. If I came on this panel 10 or 12 years ago, I might not have admitted I was a nurse because of the perception that that made you somehow less valuable, which is a real shame, right? When I entered law, as I said, the next issue was that I was the woman with children. And I think, as Anshula said, I was offered less opportunities because it was assumed I wouldn't have the time to pursue them. So people would ask if I wanted a non-partnership track position, or they would just assume it. So again, I had to sort of correct that and put myself forward to that. And I think Probably there is not the outward discrimination, at least in many countries, that women once faced. But the stereotypes do still persist, and they have impact. I was at a international trade conference a couple of years ago in Beijing, and I was at a table where I knew a lot of the people, and the table were all men except for me. And when someone new sat down at the table, one of my colleagues introduced me as the most aggressive lawyer in the company. And he thought it was sort of a funny joke, but I thought, what man would be introduced that way? They'd probably be introduced as tough or effective, maybe assertive, but certainly not aggressive. And, luckily I actually knew the newcomer, so I wasn't too offended, but, it was there. And then, interesting enough, when I was showing my mother a picture of the conference, me at the table, her question was, what are you doing at a table full of men? Which again, and she is obviously an older generation, but again, the stereotypes persist. You don't belong, right? You don't belong. And I guess I would say sort of finally, one of the biggest challenges is the exclusion that you often have socially in a male-dominated area. And again, I would say this is absolutely not intended. Most men would never want to exclude you. They're your colleague. But you'll look around the table and you might be one of, or the only woman or one of two women. And I say sort of for the men who are listening, when you're at that table, ask yourself, is that the situation and why, right? And what happens, and it's just natural, is that after work, it's more natural for a couple of the men to say, hey, let's go get a beer, or, let's go watch a game together. And it's a little bit more uncomfortable to do that with maybe the only woman in the room. And certainly if it's a young woman, there is some discomfort about, should I become a sponsor of a young woman? What might my family say? What might be the perception? And because you're excluded from those social activities, there's less opportunity to form bonds. So that is a continued issue. And I'm not really sure I have the answer, except that if you're in a position of management, try to create opportunities that those social bonds can be formed between all of your team, not just casually with one group or the other.
I think that's very important. That's so true. Making sure that there's enough opportunities for women to be part of these social gatherings. What are the other things would you say could be done in your respective industries, since all of you are in positions of power where you can make an impact, to be more inclusive of women or to prevent these barriers? Ms. Wong?
Okay, because just now I spoke very much about my corporate career, and obviously now I control the situation that I'm in as an entrepreneur. I'm operating as an entrepreneur in a consulting industry. Obviously, many talk about the high attrition rates for women due to the hours. And in some places in the traditional consulting, there's also the old boys club.
Yeah.
Right. However, for me, the way I see it is I don't work on quotas or picking male or female, having been also working well in male-dominated industry. I think how I see it is whoever who does the job best to get the job. That's the way I see it. But I'm glad that last year we appointed two amazing women as part of our satellite, one from Hong Kong, Laura Kojinskin, for those who had including yourself, I think, Asha, watched us on APAC Change Insider, and Dr. Pasita Vongswadi, a Thai who is in Germany researching on change together with us. And we are increasingly bringing in all these young, amazing women. And they are amazing. When you work with them, their stamina, it's like 24 hours. They are on it, and they are always passionate and have the right spirit and attitude. And it's contagious working with them. It makes you love your job more, right? So I think that's what these are key factors when we decide on who to pick to work with. Now, when you go in to consult the companies, fortunately or unfortunately, still, in fact, unfortunately, in many of the family businesses in Asia, the senior teams are still predominantly men. I can give you an example. You can be talking to eight men in senior leadership, and while they are trying to change, they haven't yet taken on maybe their second or third woman onto the board. And if you're in a role where you have to tell them the issues that they have to change and what they believe in isn't what it should be, the way the solution is, I look back at my career and I think, thank goodness I had the training working with all these men, because if I was timid and not bold, and I think at some point this was some area I had to brush up on in my career, I think today I would not be able to run my business and operate as effectively and help the family businesses.
Miss Kant, I think banking is an industry that definitely needs more women. How do you think? What do you think banks can do to encourage more women or to prevent these barriers?
In fact, it may sound a bit strange, but till a few years ago, till very recently, in fact, in India, if you had seen about 5 years ago, the number one, the top person in the largest banks in the country, whether they were public sector banks or private sector banks in India, they had a woman at the head of it. So it's India, for instance, is a country which is a strange dichotomy. People there are actually used to seeing women in power. We always had queens, and we had a prime minister who was one of the most powerful prime ministers of the country. So I don't think there is a natural resistance to seeing women move up the ladder. It's the little things actually which, for instance, childcare, how much you do at home. Is there an encouraging attitude, particularly in the education side? Do you expend enough resources, particularly when family resources are limited, equally on your, on your daughters as you do on your sons? Those are the little things which sort of set you up for unequal opportunities as you grow older. But, I think I'll go back to what Lorna said. And all of us mentioned that I think there is a need for us to have self-confidence in our own abilities. I think sometimes, I know some of the men get upset when I say this, but I think that the sense of commitment, the sincerity, that need to deliver on with integrity and honesty, it's very strong in women. And these women are always then an asset to any workplace, whether it's in board rooms, whether it's in teams. I think this sense of confidence is really necessary, because quite often you have to fight your own battles. You have to make your way ahead. And if you have that self-confidence that you can do it, you're not less than anyone. Maybe you're one step ahead of the others. I think that will enable and facilitate girls and women to move ahead in any career or any field, I think. Not just banking and finance, but that's the spirit that's required. And to add to what Lorna said, ability to take on risks. Don't be risk averse, Ultimately, things fall into place. There may be one step back, but there are always two steps forward in your life and career. Yeah.
I think that's great advice, being self-confident and just making sure women have the opportunities, equal opportunities for education. Before we move on to the next question, if anyone in the audience wants to ask a question, they can please submit one through the Q&A function. I think my next question would be...
I was going to add something to the quota argument or quota aspect and somewhat challenge that before we move on to the next question. because I think I don't fully agree well, put it this way, everyone knows diversity works. I think there's enough out there. And so if you educate a board or management, you need diverse viewpoints. So you need women in power, you need women there. And I think we'd all be sort of against an idea where simply you need to hire more women, so everyone needs to be a woman that you hire next, regardless of ability. That would be sort of a horrible situation. But I think there are finessed ways that you can use quotas. And I actually do think they're one of the only ways that will work. And for example, if you're hiring, you can talk to the recruiters or even yourself if you're involved and require that equal number of male and female candidates are presented for interviews. That's one way. You're not cutting out people who are qualified, but you're saying, I'm not even going to start the interview process without you giving me the same number of women and men. The other thing is too, if you're in a power to hire a company, whether that's for a small service or a large service, hire an external law firm, ask them about their diversity policies and what they do to promote not just women, but other diverse groups. And I think if you're in a position of power, you should be asking those questions of your vendors. What do they do about quotas and number of women? How many people do they have on their board? So the two things, I think quotas in a way of entry level sort of things, not necessarily your final decision, but they should be part of your process, hiring process. So.
I think that's a good viewpoint, actually. Making sure that there's enough equal sort of representation to begin with before even making a choice. I think we can take one question from the audience before we have to end this panel, unfortunately. So Lisa's asked a question. She says, as a young woman exploring the opportunities in her professional life, she's interested to hear about any critical inspirations or moments in your early career that guided you in what to explore further. Miss Wong, would you want to start with this?
Could you ask the question again, Ashas?
Yes, it's she's interested to hear about critical inspirations or moments in your early career that guided you in what to explore further. I think this you could even include if you had any early mentors who guided you, or the importance of mentorship at a young stage.
Early inspiration.
Mm-hmm.
I think one thing pops to mind for me, which is that I had this boss called Huang Hongpeng, who was in FNN, and at that time, being one of the young general managers there, most of my colleagues were more matured. And one of the things that he inspired me, and I have learned all through, and it still remains today, and I remind myself that I have to continue to do better, is in his own traditional way, he said, you let all of them speak first, then you speak. Because when you're young, you tend to get over enthusiastic and want to get your views across. And he emphasized the importance of listening first. Listening first, and then from there, by the time we finished the meeting, essentially everybody said everything already. You have to say, right? It really pushes you also to think hard about what else you can value add. And for me, that really inspired me, because it was such a tough thing to do. And till today, I feel I have to continue to ensure that I listen first and listen more. Yes. Continue to improve that. So that inspired me.
I think that's good advice. Ms. Strong?
I was trying to think if there's one moment that inspired me. I'm not really sure. I would say I was fortunate to work under a number of women leaders who were inspiring in themselves, in that they didn't let barriers hold them back. So that was always great. I must say, I also benefited hugely from the support of friends and colleagues who sometimes believed in me when I didn't. And that was very important. One defining moment is one of my actually own staff suggested I was dealing randomly with a bit of a trade finance problem when I was with HSBC Canada, randomly suggested I go to a certain seminar. And I was allowed to go, there was budget, and I went, and it was interesting. I thought, what a bunch of weird people that all care about trade finance. Now I'm one of them. But at the time, the next time that was held, I had the opportunity to sit on a panel. And that was a man who led those seminars who invited me to. And I think actually he was promoting diversity because the panels were mainly men. And I was so nervous. And I think in the whole panel, although I prepared endlessly, I only said one word. I think I agreed with someone's assessment. But it was the start of my opportunity to sit on trade panels and get really involved in the industry. So it was hugely influential in my career and meeting senior people in the industry. And I think that was due to this one gentleman's desire to have a diverse panel. So it was quite impactful for me.
Ms. Kant?
You know, when I think back to the early days, I think, just while Mewai and Lorna were speaking, I was thinking, and I realized that, it's mainly my parents who inspired me to do what I did and continued, and in the manner which I did. So, if I remember the atmosphere within our home, and this is, way back in the 60s and the 70s, these were not, I remember my mom reading a book and my dad reading a book. So my mom was a voracious reader. She was well educated, And there was somehow, although she was a traditional homemaker and my dad was the one who was earning a living, there was never any atmosphere that she was in any way less or in a slightly subservient position because she wasn't earning money. So there was this atmosphere in the home that women and men or girls and boys, they are completely at par, and money was not, abundant in our home. So when there were conversations about how much we can budget or spend for my brother's education versus mine, there was never, ever any difference in terms of, oh, you are a girl, you'll get married and you don't really need to earn your living. Not once. Although in those days in India, that was a traditional option, So one of the choices after finishing my education was either academics, like Lorna said, these were the traditional, women-oriented road, become a teacher. Or you could just get married, You didn't need to look for a job at all. But the atmosphere within the home, and I give all credit to my dad and my mom, both of them. I think that inspired me to grow up with the belief that I can do anything. I'm as good as anybody else. I never ever sort of underestimated or undermined myself. The other thing is my dad, particularly, he was like huge man of integrity and honesty. And I'm not talking about taking money or giving money in the wrong way. It's about integrity to whatever you do as a husband, as a father. He was a professor, he was an engineer. So what you give to your role, you have to give your best. So that's really held me in good stead. You have to be honest towards whatever you're working on. So I think these are early life lessons and they've really held me in good stead.
Thank you so much for sharing these early life lessons. I think that's all the questions we have time for. It was truly an honor having all of you on this panel, and really great to hear all of your inspiring stories and your journey that's led you to be here. And I hope that we can continue this conversation someday in the future. So thank you so much, and wishing all of you a happy International Women's Day.
And thank you so much for inviting us. Also an honor to be here. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Arshia. Great to touch base with you, Lorna.
Lovely to meet you.
Yes.
Thank you. Happy International Women's Day.
Likewise to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.